The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello, welcome to the People's View. We're talking with Dee Jurius from the Josiah Bartlett Center here in New Hampshire.
Yes.
Okay, and you're an education fellow up there.
I am.
And what does that mean?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Carl.
Okay.
I'm happy to be down. And it means that I am working, it's a Community Education Fellow, so trying to educate people, and ironically about education, right? So I'm the person who's kind of going out, talking to parents, families, even students about different educational options in New Hampshire. And so the Bartlett Center it's New Hampshire's free market think tank. Mm-hmm. So talking about free market ideas to try to promote prosperity and opportunity for all families, for all people in New Hampshire. So one of the things we're focusing on this year is education and education freedom. So that's what I've been working on this year.
Okay, well, what does that make you do or have you do?
Yeah, so...
You go around to talking to people, or are you trying to do interviews like this to get your word out?
Yeah, a lot of different things. So we've done some events throughout the state. We do a good bit of writing, publishing op-eds in the paper, and then just talking to families. Done some interviews, just getting out family stories about the importance of having educational options, stories about students who are doing really well in their education settings, and just kind of highlighting that throughout the state.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Are you working with some of the other nonprofits that are working on education?
Yeah, there's quite a few of us that kind of have, I think they can refer to it as a coalition, right? There's a number of us that work together. So the scholarship agency, who is, they're running the newest program, the Education Freedom Accounts. That's the Children's Scholarship Fund of New Hampshire. Uh-huh. And they're kind of on the front lines of that, right. And they're the ones coordinating the program. So we work pretty closely with them. And then there's other nonprofits who do research, they do polling, collect data. And there's kind of a group of us together that are just working on it, trying to get the word out. Yeah.
So are you looking at data for to sell the variety of things that are there? What's the people who are looking at polling?
So part of the work is providing information to legislators or different policymakers, right. People who are making decisions. Mm-hmm. And so some of the polling is within the state of New Hampshire, looking at parents and teachers and just community members who are supportive of these policy ideas. Mm-hmm, so whether they're supportive of education choice, the different types of education choice there are, and we can talk more about those if that's something you're interested in. But just talking about what different families, different people like. So we're finding that the majority of New Hampshire residents, by polling, are supportive of having educational options for students, especially regardless of income. So that's part of the focus of is providing opportunities for middle and low income families.
Well, how do you get your information out to the public? I mean, does this come out just in working with the legislators?
Part of it is coming through them, right? So we provide information to them. That's kind of the decision maker. My role with the Bartlett Center is more community focused. So It's more, again, writing op-eds to have printed in the newspaper, or hosting events. Going around and just helping families understand, doing shows like this one, just trying to help people understand what their options might be, because some people might not even be familiar with educational choice, with the freedom accounts that have come out.
Especially people who just moved to New Hampshire.
Absolutely.
Because, we have a large selection in the state.
Yeah.
And I don't think people know that.
I know. Yeah, I'd love to talk about the various options we have. So obviously in New Hampshire, we have a robust public education, which includes our brick and mortar and our traditional public schools, and our public charter schools as well. We have a number of cool, innovative schools throughout the state. Again, publicly funded. They're public schools that parents can choose to send their kids to. And then we also have private school choice. So we have a number of private schools. We have prep schools. We have some religious schools, Montessori, lots of other interesting things. Again, throughout the whole state, there's options for families. And within that, the state of New Hampshire, we just passed, this past year, started a new program called Education Freedom Accounts, which is a really exciting new policy. So it's a government-approved savings account, and it allows for families under a certain income threshold to apply to receive their state education grant, their adequacy grant.
Oh.
And it goes into an account, and they can spend it on their child's education in any way, like in a way that fits the child. So if they're not in public school, so they could pay for private school tuition, they could pay for a tutor, if they need speech therapy or other therapies like that, and a variety of other educational expenses they can pay with this account. And it's just a small portion of what per pupil funding would be. Like at a public school, it's the state chunk, basically. And families can apply and can use that. And so we're really excited about that. It opens up opportunity for a number of Granite State families. Yeah.
Does any of the surrounding states have that?
Not necessarily in New England. So before this past legislative session, there were 5, they call them ESA, Educational Savings Accounts, is kind of the policy. So we like to put our own spin on things in New Hampshire, right? The live free or die state. So we've got our Education Freedom Accounts, but it's the same policy. So there were 5 states that had programs. Arizona was the first, and that started in 2011, I believe, so 10 years ago. Florida has one, Tennessee. I'm going to blank on the other states.
Okay.
But then this past year, there's been a lot of education choice in states all across the country. So I think there's 5 or 6 states that put new ESA programs in, and people expanded vouchers, tax credit scholarships, which we also have in New Hampshire. So New England is not necessarily the hotbed of education choice, but across the country, legislatures have been, they've been passing education choice legislation.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
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 So how do people tie into it? Do they call you, or do they have to find out information? Or?
That's a really important question for people who want to know more. So at the Josiah Bartlett Center, we've been doing writing and publishing about education and a number of other issues. So that's at jbartlett with 2 T's at the end, .org. But if they're interested in potentially applying for that, either the tax credit scholarships, which is based on business taxes in New Hampshire, or the Education Freedom Account program, they can go to, it's nh.scholarshipfund.org, and you can apply there. There's frequently asked questions, all kinds of information for families, pretty much anything I think you could ask. You'll find on there, and if not, shoot us an email. We'll get back to you.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is really, what is the statistics and the number of people that are taking this? Do you have any idea now?
The Freedom Account?
Yeah.
So it's a brand new program.
Right.
With the Bartlett Center actually commissioned a study to try to estimate how many people would take part. So back when we were debating whether the policy should go into effect, saying, what's the cost going to be? We're doing some economic analysis. And we estimated that about just short of 1,000 students would partake. And so this is back the very beginning of this calendar year. And so now it's actually exciting, and some people might have seen headlines. They've had about 1,500 or even more families who've applied and expressed interest in the program, which is really exciting. But that's a very small fraction of the students in New Hampshire. I think it's about 40% of New Hampshire families are eligible for the fund based on the income level, family income. So, but again, it's a pretty small percentage of people that have been interested.
I know the headlines are they're taking you away from the public schools.
Oh, yes.
And they said that, they're going to bankrupt our school fund, you know.
I know.
And, but that's not really it doesn't affect the school
So
money.
it doesn't. I guess part of it is when a student is enrolled in a public school, that school receives certain funding to educate the student. So part of that, a very small portion there's some federal money that comes in, right? There's the state portion, which starts at about $3,700 per student, but that can fluctuate depending on a variety of factors. And then there's local money, so that's by taxation, right? So a school gets, on average, per student per year in the 2021, by the end of the 2021 school year, it costs about $21,000 per student for a year of education. So that's the funding that they get. Now, if a student leaves a public school, they don't get the money anymore because they're not educating the student. So the money does leave the school at some point, not for another calendar year because it's based on the previous year's enrollment. So if you're not educating a student, you don't get money to not educate the student. But it actually has less impact than you would think, because if a student withdraws from a public school and decides, I'd like to apply for this EFA, this account, they're going to get on average about $4,600. That would be the cost to the state. But the average funding is $21,000. So it's less than a quarter of the amount that they're receiving. And the rest of the money raised by local property taxes will remain in the school for that full school year.
Yeah, you're taking it from the state, but not from the
right. No local money comes. Yeah. That's right.
I don't think people understand that, because that's a big problem when some of the charter schools go.
Yeah.
Because they don't take all the money.
Correct. Yeah, they are not funded as much. Yes.
And people didn't understand that. They couldn't affect it. So it really, the public schools come out a little bit ahead.
Yeah. Yes, potentially. So for the cost to the state of one EFA student, the cost of the school, so you could have 4 students enrolled in an EFA program for the same cost as one in a public school. Right. So there is some cost, but there's also cost savings, because you're not spending those additional thousands of dollars. And I think, so our estimate, like I said, we thought it would be around 1,000. It's turning out to be a few more than that. But even if every student that was interested, all 1,500 of them applied, were approved, and used the fund, it would still be right around $7 million would be the cost to the state. And at the end of last year, the state spending was, round numbers, just the state portion, which is about a quarter of what we spend on education, was $769 million. Yeah. So it's less than 1% of the state funding. And of the total spending, which was over $3 billion, it is less than 0.2% of the funding. So it is accurate to say that it does cost money. It's just such a small percentage. And for these students, some of whom are really struggling in their schools, for a variety of reasons, it can really make or break their school experience to be able to have an option to have somewhere else to go. And so that if the state believes it has some responsibility to be part of funding the education of these students, we want an education that's the best fit for every student.
Well, that's what they were saying, that the state wasn't filling its requirement of education. But now this sounds like it's doing a better job and covering all the different things that are needed for a particular child.
Yeah. Yep. So sometimes, I was thinking today about like a good metaphor, a good way to explain. So there are a lot of really great public schools, and sometimes it's just not the best fit for a student. So I was thinking about if you went to a really high end, like a seafood restaurant, and you've gotten great recommendations. It's this fabulous school. Everyone gives it rave reviews. But you have a shellfish allergy, it's not going to be a good fit for you for dinner, right? It can still be a Michelin star restaurant. It could be so wonderful, best seafood, on the East Coast. But if you're allergic to shellfish, it's not going to be a great experience for you. And so for some kids, Their assigned public school right within their zip code is just not the best fit for them.
Right.
And we want all students to have an option. So students with, families of means, right, who have money to just spend on tuition to send their kids to a private school, have always had access to educational choice, right? But not all families have that. They don't have that much income to be able to spend on their child's education. And so this is it's a small portion to help those families out, to provide some financial ability to make a different choice.
To give the child something that he can use in his future or
Absolutely.
his or her future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you talk at all to the public schools about variety of teaching formats, I guess you might say?
I haven't specifically, but I know public schools do. I know a lot of teachers. Obviously, I am a product of New Hampshire Public Schools. I still have some good connections with my teachers, and I have a lot of friends that are teachers. And the majority of them are absolutely wonderful, right? They're great. Teachers want what's best for kids. They don't get into teaching because they don't want kids to learn, right? They don't get into teaching because they're trying to hurt kids or trying to, they want to do what's best for kids. They love kids. They want them to learn. And teachers are doing a variety of instruction in a lot of different ways. So over the past year, I haven't spent a lot of time with teachers, but I know that that's what teachers are doing. That's why they're in the field.
Okay, I understand that too, but I had 4 children, and they're all different, of course. And they had different needs in their school. And the school really, they grew up in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, which I think is a great school for them. They had a variety of handling, different ways of, and they had sort of organize the kids to benefit them a little bit. And I was just wondering if I get the feeling that not all schools in New Hampshire do things like that.
Are you thinking based on even educational ability or interest? Yeah, so...
both.
Okay.
Okay, both.
Yeah. I think every school is different. One of the things about education is there is still a lot of local control, right? You've got school boards and superintendents and principals that are making decisions. And there's different educational philosophies, right? So for a while they had, they would call them tracking, right? So you've got by aptitude, you've got kids in different tracks and they're kind of going along. And then you've kind of had a model of more integration, right? Trying to want kids of all abilities together and working with each other, learning from each other, and having a variety of instruction in the classroom. The teacher word for it would be differentiation. So it's this idea that within a classroom you have students of a variety of academic abilities, and you differentiate your instruction so that each kid can learn at their level. So I think broadly that's where we are now in the field of education, and I'm sure there's lots of debates about, which of those two, they're not exclusive, but which of those two models is preferred. Some people would say, I want my child or my student with other students who learn like them at that same ability. And some people say, I want them to be challenged, right? Or to have empathy for students who struggle. So there's a variety of reasons for that. But right now, I think the prevailing model would be a more integrationist approach, trying to keep students in either it's a least restrictive environment, having them be part of the community together.
I think that's what they're taking, their way of taking the students that have language problems. They try to mix them in there. They think that that helps them adapt to the English or language, or have you experienced anything of that?
I haven't had any experience with that.
Okay.
I think I can imagine. So I took French in high school. You would never know it. I have almost no French left in. A few vocab words, enough to order fish and ask where the bathroom is, right? And But I remember my French teacher saying, you will only learn really to speak French if you're immersed in it. So I could see an argument for that. I'm not sure that's why they're wanting students to be integrated. I think some of it's probably based on community. It's based on a student's social experience. wanting to be with their peers. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of educational philosophy around that. But I think, students being with their friends is a good way to develop socially, whether it's language or just other skills, you know what I mean? Even if it's just social skills, kids being together in an environment and learning to work together is important.
I always wondered because, a lot of people are coming here from different countries, and some of them have real different languages.
Yeah. And that's a big piece of, so the state actually, and they acknowledge that even, so there's additional funding for students who are, they call them English language learners, ELL. So the state says, wow, like you're going to need more help, right? The school's going to need more help to provide this for you. We want you to learn this. And so they actually apportion more funding for students who are learning English. So they recognize that. I mean, that's long been recognized. And I think...
well, they support adult education too, don't they?
For not specifically in the Freedom accounts, there is adult education.
Not the Freedom accounts, but I was wondering the state had some, we have, a school for adults, I guess you say here.
There is adult education as well, yes.
And I was wondering, is that supported by the state a little bit?
That's a question I don't know the answer to.
Oh.
You found one.
I gotcha.
I would be happy to get back to you. We'll get back to your list. Maybe someone else who comes on will know the answer.
Well, I just think that as a community, and the schools are the center of most communities, get them to all talk the same language is going to help. Not that they can't talk their own language, but I think if you get a better understanding, the more you understand the language of somebody else, I think.
Well, yeah, I think it's essential that we're able to talk to each other. And sometimes that takes a lot of patience.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes even if we're speaking the same language, we don't necessarily understand each other. So, community is really important. And I think sometimes the school isn't providing a community that a family wants. Maybe they're looking to provide community somewhere elsewhere. And I think education choice allows for that, allows for community to exist in a lot of different places, not just by your zip code necessarily. Yeah.
Well, but the bigger cities have more, I guess, people coming in who have immigrants or background to different languages. So.
Right.
Which is something they shouldn't try to segregate them. They should try to mix them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that we would want the state to be in the business of separating people by that.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the case in any of our schools, public or private.
Well, what do you think we might change? Is there anything legislatively that we should be aware of that is needed?
I guess one thing that that we'd like to see at the Bartlett Center is, so there's currently an income cap on the Freedom accounts that we've passed. So it's 300% of the federal poverty level, which based on 2021 income for a family of 5 is $79,500. Okay. So below that, you're eligible for this grant, right? But what we would say is public education isn't means tested, right? So you move to Nashua, right? You come in and you want to enroll your child in public school. The school doesn't say, how much money do you make? Right? They don't ask you. The public education is for everybody. Right. And so what we're saying is that state spending, that state portion per kid is for everyone. Right. And so everyone should have access to that. So we're it shouldn't be determined by where you go to school shouldn't be determined by your zip code necessarily, right? And that we don't want public education is not means tested. It's not based on how much money you make. And so we would really like to see it available for all families. And where we are is a great start. But I think that's one piece that we'd like to see. Is that going to grow
slowly, you mean, something like that? I mean, who picks 300%? Why is it 300? Why isn't it 250 or 350?
Yeah, I know. There's I think there's some historical precedent. The business tax credit scholarship is at 300% too. Right. So at some point,
I never heard why they chose it there either.
That's above my pay grade. Yeah,
I was up there when that was being discussed. So.
Yeah.
But anyway, I didn't want to change anything in our discussion, but I just was wondering what might be needed. And if you have ideas on legislation, or are you working with the State Department of Education?
Yeah, so not on anything specific. I think at this point, I'm more turned outward, trying to tell people about what's happened, educating about the program. Again, I think we would like to see the eligibility expanded, not because we want students to leave public schools, just because we want families to have an option, and we think that's really important, that they have a choice, that they have that ability.
With you.
Yeah. And so now I think that's for my role is largely just saying, here's what it is, because when you're talking to families, I think at some point they're in day-to-day parenting, raising kids, they don't want to talk to me about like, well, maybe this is going to happen, and here's the philosophy behind it. They want to know, what are my options now? Yeah. What can I do? How can you help me? And so that's kind of where we are right now, and that's my role is much more outward facing, not as much in.
And are there any of your people you're talking to saying that they're missing the point on something, or that they should add something? Are they telling you?
That's a good question. I think because it's a new program, we're still in the initial phases.
I think you have to develop it. But
I think there's probably things that we're working out, and the applications just opened in August. So families are kind of getting in, they're starting to get approved, and the first payments will be they'll be dispersed on November 1st, I think is when they're going to start coming. So I'm sure we'll start to get more feedback after that. Yes, after that date, we'll get a better sense of where we are. Yeah.
Well, Di, we're almost finished.
Oh my goodness.
Is there any last comments you want to make for the audience?
I'll just say nh.childrenscholarship.org is where you can go if you're interested in education freedom accounts. If that might be a good option for your family, you want to see if you're eligible. It's an exciting new program, helping families have some more educational choice.
And I'm sure you got a lot of information for them if they call you.
Yep, so absolutely. jbartlett.org is my organization, and we'd love to hear from you. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
Yeah.
And maybe next year we'll hear a little bit more about your program.
Yeah, that would be great. Hopefully we'll have some updates.
Okay, very good.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.